Very quickly, before our next program, we're going to have Jessica VerSteeg from Paragon Coin come up, tell us a little bit about herself, and then introduce it.
Thank you. Wow, this room has filled up a lot more since I got here this morning. So thank you guys for coming. My name is Jessica VerSteeg, and I am the CEO of Paragon Coin. It's confusing because they're kind of all over. We are building a blockchain solution for the cannabis industry. Wow, scary. And what's a girl doing in cannabis? We're also offline building co-working spaces for cannabis-related startups. And I know a lot of people are thinking cannabis and blockchain, what's going on? So I will maybe address the question that's looming in some of your minds, maybe not all, but recently there have been a lot of headlines criticizing me about what's a model doing in blockchain? Because what do we know about cryptocurrency and what do we know about blockchain? We're not supposed to think, we're just supposed to be on the cover of magazines. So anyways, I hope that maybe I'll learn something from this amazing panel that's going to be speaking today. And before that, I would love to introduce Brock Pierce, a guy who clearly knows a thing or two about blockchain and cryptocurrency. Brock?
Hi, good morning. Lots of people here already. We're going to kick off a deck here to walk you through some more of the basics of cryptocurrency, blockchain, and how the sort of ICO is affecting capital formation in the early days and how that might impact crowdfunding. Do we have a clicker or do I just say something? If we can go to the first slide, we'll kick that up. I like to give everyone a primer, which is, here we go. Kind of taking us back in time, specifically to 1994, when the internet was a new technology that very few people understand. There was a great discussion of it in the Today Show. Here we go.
56 fast. I wasn't prepared to translate that, because I was doing that little tease. That little mark with the A and then the ring around it.
At.
See, that's what I said. Katie said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
But I've never heard it. I've never heard it said. I've always seen the mark, but never heard it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Violence and NBC. See, there it is. Violence at NBC, GE com. I mean,
Well, Allison should know.
what is internet anyway?
Internet is that massive computer network, the one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean? How does what do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
No, she can't say anything in 10 seconds or less.
Oh, Allison will be in the studio shortly.
What is
What does it mean?
It's a giant computer network made up of, starting from...
Oh, I thought you were going to tell us what this was.
It's
So
like
you're
a
looking at the
computer
dictionary.
billboard.
It's not a... It's a computer billboard, but it's
Right.
nationwide. It's several universities covered in all.
I think you get the idea. This is a technology that, only 20 years ago, very few people understood. By 1995, Newsweek was explaining how the internet was going to fail, that it was a fad, primarily only used by criminals, and that it was going to go away. And by the year 2000, the internet bubble had crashed, and there were no investors in the world in 2001 that would invest in internet companies. This is only 15, 16 years ago. And this is very similar in terms of people's understanding of cryptocurrency and blockchain today. So I like to use this as an analogy. So let's talk about a little bit of what have you heard? What have you heard about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin? Maybe that it's insecure. That Mt. Gox was hacked and money's been lost. The reality is it's the most secure system the world has ever seen. It's well over 500 times larger than all of Google's global infrastructure combined. There is no more secure network in the world than Bitcoin, and when you start hearing things about how it's insecure, it is not at the protocol level. That's like saying because someone's email was hacked that email as a protocol doesn't work. That was a mistake made at the application layer, not at the protocol layer. And yes, those are going to continue to be risks. Security is a paramount issue for anyone playing in this space or building in this space, but the underlying protocol is extremely secure. You may have heard that it's only used by criminals. Well, that's clearly not the case, but some of the earliest adopters of new technologies are going to be the fringe users that need it the most. As that industry is maturing, clear that becomes a smaller and smaller percentage of the transactions that are occurring. And most of the world's top thought leaders, academics, technologists, venture capitalists, et cetera, think that this is a technology that's here to stay. You may have also heard the price went way up and the price has come all the way down. Every fundamental metric, even before the price of Bitcoin had increased, was strongly up and to the right, and a very easy to predict trend that the price of Bitcoin was going to go up substantially, which it has. It's been growing exponentially. So what is it? It's digital value. It's got a fixed supply in the case of Bitcoin and others of Bitcoin. There'll never be more than 21 million. Because it's digital, it's programmable. It's part of a decentralized network, so there's no governing body. I'm chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation, but there is no one that runs or governs Bitcoin. It's an open peer-to-peer protocol, and also can't be shut down. The only way to shut off Bitcoin is to shut off the internet indefinitely. It's an incredibly resilient system, which we'll get into shortly. And you can't counterfeit Bitcoin. You can't. It's a public source of truth. That data is immutable. And so these are just some of the basics of what is it. So for the first time in human history, I can transfer value from one place to another with no middlemen. I can do that instantly, and I can do it with negligible fees and complete transparency. Historically, the only way I could transfer value in this way was being in the same physical space, or I needed banks and many of the other infrastructure and systems that have existed that allowed us to get to the point that we are. But this technology is eliminating that need because we weren't able to do it until now. From a sort of a technology sort of trending perspective, this is a little outdated, but I think it's pretty useful. The open source movement and GitHub is clearly transforming the world because I don't have to recreate the wheel every time. I can find the best code possible and use that on a modular basis. This is the amount of times that PayPal had been referenced in GitHub amongst the top technologists, and here's kind of how Bitcoin and cryptocurrency looks. And this is data going back to 2014, 2015, 2016. Clearly, if you want to see where the world is going, take a look at where the greatest engineers are spending their time. So some big picture stuff. I like this book and I highly recommend it. I use this, the digital starfish as the logo for my firm, Blockchain Capital. But there's a book called The Starfish and the Spider. Do you know what happens when you cut the leg off a spider? It walks with a limp. You cut off a second leg, more of a limp. You cut off its head, it's dead. But a starfish, on the other hand, when you cut the leg off a starfish, it grows back. But if you cut any part of the center of the starfish with that leg becomes an entirely new starfish. If you cut it 5 ways through the middle, it'll become 5 starfish. And this is the best sort of analog example of decentralized or distributed systems in nature. And this is a great book that I recommend. It's the best book probably written on decentralization. But these are the macro trends, and that's that the world is moving from centralized systems to distributed and decentralized systems. And that's one of the most important trends, and this is the one that is basically powering this entire blockchain sort of concept, and all the industries are being impacted because of the resilience of its architecture and the efficiency and security that it's able to provide. So I like this data, and you've seen this before. Everybody knows that Uber is the world's largest taxi company, but it owns no cars. Facebook is the largest media company, but it makes no content. Alibaba is the largest retailer in the world, but has no inventory. Airbnb, biggest provider of sort of housing and accommodations, but doesn't have any rooms. Bitcoin is the fastest growing bank in the world, but with no employees or branches. And so these, sort of platforms are, going to continue to be impactful, and I think they'll become distributed or decentralized ones. So these are the 3 macro trends that are combining, I think, most of the innovation happening in the world. One being, we talked about open source, and that's moving from proprietary systems to open systems. Is that we're going from shared hardware versus, individual, again, proprietary hardware, and then from centralized systems to decentralized systems. And these are the areas that I'd be focused as call it a macro investor. There's obviously a few other interesting things in the world. I love gene editing, as well as a few others. But, kind of macro trends are, again, we went through the PC era in the 1970s, to the internet era in the mid-90s, and now we're entering sort of that next third evolution of the internet with the blockchain. Bitcoin is only one of well over 1,000 cryptocurrencies today. The overall market cap now is about 150 billion, Bitcoin representing about half of that. But clearly, we've now got, I think, 13 or 14 unicorns that have been produced in this space over the last year. So, there's probably no sector that's been creating more value faster. And the right way to think about this is to think about the blockchain as the operating system or the enabling technology, and think of Bitcoin and these other things just as the first application. That's kind of the macros of that. Think of also Bitcoin. I don't know if Bitcoin is the Friendster, the MySpace, the Facebook, the Instagram, the Snapchat, or whatever else might come next. But I do know it's the proof of concept. Bitcoin has proven all of these big ideas actually work, and Bitcoin very likely has a long-term role to play. I'm convinced that something like Bitcoin is the future, that we need a sort of non-sovereign currency, and it's my view that that non-sovereign sort of currency or store of value might be the meta currency that sits above everything. But when I travel to Europe, just like I convert my dollars to euros, I might be converting a meta currency that is deflationary versus inflationary, and I convert that into a transactional currency that allows me to participate in sort of local markets. And so kind of, again, macro, where is the world going? We went from living in this verbal sort of communication era to the telecommunication era, which provided synchronous, sort of transfers of information. The Internet of Information has democratized sort of information around the world and eliminated borders. The Internet allowed that to occur with asynchronous as well as synchronous, and the blockchain era is going to do the same thing for value and trust. You have a couple of types of blockchains in the existing world today. The current system is you've got a bunch of banks, and the big innovation being this concept of the Byzantine generals problem. So the kind of the holy grail of computer science problems since the emergence of the internet was, how do I transfer value on a peer-to-peer basis? This is not a new idea. It's just that no one in the world was able to figure it out. And sometimes you may say, well, what about PayPal? PayPal didn't solve any of this. All they did is created, essentially an online bank. But still, with that centralized system, they control all of your money, and you're reliant upon them allowing you access to that product or service. So the existing world is this sort of concept of the third parties holding everything. And so you couldn't do this on a peer-to-peer basis in the same way that if I sent you an email and attached a picture to it, how do you know when you receive that email that I didn't keep a copy for myself or send it to 6 other people? And so this is known as the double spend, and this is this holy grail of computer science problems. So if you were studying for your PhD in cryptography, mathematics, computer science, you likely encountered this problem that no one was able to solve. Bitcoin solved this problem. And they did it by creating a shared distributed ledger. So instead of me having information and you having information, you not trusting my information and me not trusting your information, which is how the world has currently been architected, what if we put all of that information into the same database? A big public database that anyone is able to access and run. I no longer need to know you to trust and rely on the integrity of your information. So it's a pretty simple idea at its core, but the implications are, going to transform the world far more than the internet has. And again, it's a simple idea. It's the idea I no longer need to trust you to rely on the integrity of information. You may have heard of this concept of private blockchains. This is, again, very similar to the public internet and intranets. The Fortune 2000s in the early 90s were afraid of using the public internet, so they used private intranets. The same thing is happening with blockchain, and that is that the banks are saying, okay, let's have a shared database, but where only the banks are allowed to access it. And that's a private blockchain. I think that long-term, the majority of this will be in public blockchains. But like with the internet, incumbents are walking before they run. And it's not to say that there's not a role for private blockchains as well. In the same way that there's still a role for private intranets. It's just not a majority of the market. Another interesting thing is, as assets become programmable, I can start to write rules into them. And I think the world is going to move from an environment of legally sort of binding agreements to technologically sort of binding agreements, where I'm no longer using contracts in the way that you think of. We're going to be using smart contracts. Like I can take out a dollar bill and write a rule on it, and that dollar bill will do whatever it is it's supposed to do based upon the terms and conditions that I've written into it. If I said it's going to rain tomorrow and you said no, we could architect a contract into that bill to check the weather conditions tomorrow based upon the sources that we told it. You'd call that an oracle, and the following day the money will arrive in your wallet or mine based upon the results, with no escrow agent or anyone that sits in the middle. And this is the way the world is starting to move, and sort of the law firm of the future is probably going to look somewhat like this. But AI and machine learning is also going to be impacting everything. That's just being one part of it. So where is it today in terms of adoption? This is obviously a big idea, and if you understand Bitcoin and Ethereum today, neither of which are able to scale to some of the big application concepts that we talk about. But where are things happening today? It's happening in the developing world. I get approached, at least in the old days, not these days, but people would be like, why should I want Bitcoin? And normally having a very negative opinion of it. And my response to them has always been, I try this sort of reverse psychology thing. So why should I want Bitcoin? I say, well, you shouldn't. And they're like, what do you mean? I go, well, it's not for you. And they're like, what do you mean not for me? I go, well, let me guess, do you have a bank account? And they're like, yeah. I go, I'm guessing you got a piece of plastic in your pocket that lets you conveniently pay for things too. Yeah. And I go, yeah, you got rule of law here that's here in theory to protect you, and often cases will. And of the 200 currencies in the world, you've got one that everyone wants more of. But if you go south of the border to Latin America, if you look at Southeast Asia or Africa, in the same way that they skipped wired telecommunication and went straight to wireless, you'll understand where this trend is, able to have the biggest impact, and that is that you've got 3 billion people on the planet that have no financial services whatsoever, another 2 billion people on the planet with limited financial services. Most people don't know that you have 70 million people in America that are on or underbanked, with about half of them having no financial systems at all and relying upon check cashing and all of the things like that. So obviously this is taking hold in places with hyperinflation like Venezuela and Argentina, which is getting better. Places where, like Cyprus that you had, obviously Africa, mobile money. Most people don't know this, but the most advanced payment market in the world is Kenya, with over 60% of all transactions being done on mobile phones using a digital currency called M-Pesa, which is prepaid cell phone minutes. I call it the telco standard. It's been around for a while. But obviously, India removing cash, things of that nature, lots of demand. Currency controls, obviously being a big one. There's many countries around the world that don't allow you to send money out of the country. Your money is trapped within that nation. We as Americans are, lucky and don't often realize that. But these are just some of the things that are driving adoption. So I think that you're going to see that adoption is starting to occur in the developing world, and in the developed world, it's going to be more blockchain in the same way that we used to make phone calls over twisted copper wires. The incumbents are going to be rolling blockchain technology into their middle and back offices, but not in a way that we as consumers will likely notice. So 2014 is the first sort of year that the big financial institutions started using blockchain technologies, at least in their testing. That obviously by 2015 and 2016 has taken off in a massive way. There's more or less no financial institution in the world that is not using this. And most of them are re-architecting their entire institutions to run on this type of technology in their middle and back office. And I think that this year, 2017, is the first year where you're going to see those pilots kind of become commercialized. And it's in that commercialization that real revenue is going to emerge. You haven't really had that to date. And when real revenue and earnings start to emerge, obviously further investment will happen, and M&A activity and the sorts of things that will only get the animal spirits getting bigger and bigger. It's a global phenomenon. These are deals around the world that are being financed by VCs, so this is not just a domestic thing, it's happening everywhere. And that's the big thing that's changing. In the same way that the internet democratized information, the blockchain is democratizing the global financial system in a way where essentially there are no borders. All the top VCs are investing in the space. And we've seen, substantial growth in the amount of capital coming into the space. In 2014, we raised more capital than the internet as a sector did in 1995. In 2015, we raised capital on par with the internet in 1996. Last year, it went flat. And during that period, because the VCs, the generalist VCs, were not increasing the amount of capital coming into the space, though the number of entrepreneurs coming into the space voting with their feet was continuing to grow, and the quality of those entrepreneurs continuing to get better, they went and started using this ICO model of raising capital. They said, if the generalist VCs won't give me money, what about the crypto community that is all newly rich and might have an interest in the products I'm building? So what happened is the ICO became very popular. I was one of the founding board members of Mastercoin. We invented the ICO model, specifically J.R. Willett, and did the first ICO in the world in June of 2013. But the model didn't really take off until last year for those reasons. Last year we had about 64 ICOs raising a little over 100 million. If you eliminate the DAO, which I think for the purposes of quality of data is the right thing to do. And clearly that number is taking off in a big way. More than $2 billion raised from ICOs this year. Some of these deals, and here it is relative to venture capital or early stage venture capital. ICOs right now are bringing in 4 times as much money as VCs are deploying around the world at the early stage. Venture capital is dead. I also think it's going to have a similar impact on crowdfunding. Not that crowdfunding is dead. It's going to just, I think, emerge and evolve into this type of model, because I think it's a more advanced and more democratized market than crowdfunding. Crowdfunding was the first step in the democratization of sort of early stage finance and breaking, the market of the VCs, only, letting, call it the elite into deals, which are pensions, endowments, and high net worth investors. Now everybody has access, equal access, and that's a beautiful thing. And I think crowdfunding was the first major leap. This is still crowdfunding. It's just being done in a more global market and accessible to everyone. And clearly where the trend is. If you're not paying attention to this, you should absolutely be doing so and be looking at sort of opportunities in this space no differently than you currently do in crowdfunding. This is an example of some of the big deals. EOS is the shirt I'm wearing. I'm one of the founders there. We started our ICO a little under 3 months ago. We've sold over $375 million worth of tokens so far, making it the largest ICO in the world. I'm also an advisor at Bancor, which raised over 150, and clearly you're seeing large amount of money, coming into these ICOs. So again, something you should be paying attention to. So a couple of predictions to wrap this up. I think that ICOs are going to replace not just all the venture capital over time, but I think it'll replace the entire private equity markets and REITs, et cetera, anywhere where there's a lack of liquidity. Because the reason why people find ICOs so valuable is they don't want to put their money into a fund and have their capital trapped for 5 to 10 years. People like liquidity. And when given an opportunity to have the same sort of investment profile, but one where it's liquid versus illiquid, as an investor, I think every single one of us will always take liquidity. I don't know how you can argue otherwise. So I think that you're going to see over 1,000 ICOs attempted in Q4 of this year. So this is continuing to accelerate. And, oops, got an extra 9 on there. I think we're going to raise probably well north of $5 billion next year. It's probably safe to say $10 billion, but I'm setting the target low. So what is it that you can do next? I like to give people calls to action. If you haven't been in this space, these are the first things that you should do. Go buy $10. Go buy $100 of the Bitcoin. I can talk to you about email until I'm blue in the face. Sending your first message is probably a good place to start. And it's not just about Bitcoin. Go buy some Ethereum, convert half of it into that. Go buy something online. Send money to someone abroad and watch how much better this is than your current bank accounts, PayPal, et cetera. Teach someone else. Reading the white paper, it's very short, is probably a good place to start. And I think where that goes to long term, which I should have put in the predictions there, is that I also think it's the end of the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, London, et cetera. I think the current stock markets of the world are also dead. And the reason why is, if I want to take a company public in the United States, I'm going public in a local market, albeit a very big one. But it's a local market that runs from 9 to 4 on weekdays, running on very old technology that's slow, expensive, and insecure, that was designed for a world of paper. Or I could go list on a global exchange that runs 24/7 by 365, running on the fastest, most secure technology the world's ever seen. How do you think that story ends? And it doesn't mean that NASDAQ is dead as a company, but I think the current stock market architecture is. it's going to migrate to this direction. And the incumbents, the existing exchanges, and the new entrants in the innovator's dilemma are going to be competing for that future market. You know, our main co-investors in deals right now are the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. So they're generally in agreement here. The question is, what do they do? But here's some things to do. And if you have any other questions for me, you can go to brock.ai. That's where my AI will answer all of your questions. Thank you.